60 minutes. 1 single hour. That is all the time it took for a self-proclaimed African strongman to crumble. In the span of 60 minutes, a top-ranking general went from threatening the world superpower to begging for its forgiveness. He went from declaring a diplomatic war to calling his adversaries great friends. This is not a story about a mistake. This is not a story about a hacked account. This is the autopsy of a dying political era. It is the story of General Muhoozi Kainerugaba of Uganda, a man who roared like a lion on social media, only to reveal that the chains around his neck were made in Washington. Why do some leaders stand tall while others fold at the first phone call? Why is sovereignty a blood oath for some, but a costume for others? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. This is the difference between noise and power. Subscribe to our channel now and stand with the story that dares to tell the truth. To understand the collapse, we must first understand the height from which he fell. The protagonist of this theater is not an ordinary citizen. He is General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the Chief of Defense Forces of Uganda. He is the first son, the heir apparent, the man who commands the tanks and the guns of a nation. When a man of this stature speaks, the ground is supposed to shake. Recently, the general decided to speak. He took to X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, to launch a verbal artillery barrage against the United States of America. His target was the U.S. Embassy in Kampala. His accusation was grave. He claimed that the Ugandan opposition leader, Bobi, had not been abducted by the state, but had kidnapped himself. But the general did not stop there. He escalated the narrative with a claim that would make any diplomat choke on their coffee. He stated, with absolute confidence, that this self-kidnapping was orchestrated in coordination with the current administration at the United States Embassy. Let that sink in for a moment. The head of the military accused a foreign diplomatic mission of conspiring to stage a disappearance of a political opponent. In the language of international relations, this is not a criticism. It is an act of hostility. It is an accusation of espionage and subversion. And then came the ultimatum. The general announced that the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPT, would suspend all cooperation with the U.S. Embassy in Kampala. He drew a red line. He threatened that any foreign power attempting to protect Bobi would be creating a serious rupture in relations with Uganda. For a brief moment, to the uninitiated eye, it looked like strength. It looked like sovereignty. It looked like an African leader finally standing up to the West and saying, "Get your hands off our politics." But, my friends, we must look closer. This was not the calculated strategy of a statesman. This was the impulsive tantrum of a man who treats geopolitics like a video game. We know this because we have seen this film before. Do you remember October of the year 2022? This same general, this same heir to the throne, took to his phone and threatened to invade a sovereign neighbor. He tweeted that it would not take him and his army 2 weeks to capture Nairobi. He threatened to conquer the capital city of Kenya, an economic powerhouse and a brotherly African nation, in 14 days. He even asked his followers where he should live once he occupied the city, suggesting the affluent neighborhoods of Westlands or Riverside. What was the result of that outburst? Did the tanks roll? Did the borders change? No. His father, President Yoweri Museveni, had to step in like a parent, apologizing for a child who broke a window. The president issued a formal apology to Kenya to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe. So, when General Muhoozi threatened the United States this time, the world did not see a strategist. They saw a pattern. They saw a paper tiger, a creature that looks ferocious from a distance, but dissolves in the rain. He called it a warning. He called it a defense of the nation. He spoke of sovereignty with the same mouth that would soon be used to swallow his own words. He was playing with matches in a room filled with gunpowder. Seemingly unaware that the explosion would not hurt the Americans, but it would destroy the credibility of his own uniform. He thought he was projecting power. He thought he was echoing the sentiments of a continent tired of interference. But there is a fundamental difference between a revolutionary and a reckless actor. A revolutionary calculates the cost and is willing to pay it. A reckless actor expects no bill to arrive, but the bill always arrives. In the high-stakes game of international politics, you do not threaten a superpower unless you are ready to face the consequences. You do not threaten to cut off military cooperation when your own logistics rely on their funding. You do not bite the hand that feeds you unless you have learned how to grow your own food. The general made a wager. He bet that his name, his rank, and his rhetoric would be enough to make the Americans be. He stood on the digital stage, chest puffed out, waiting for the applause. But the applause never came. Instead, the phone rang. And what happened next was not just a retreat. It was a total surrender of dignity. But in geopolitics, words have weight. And when the weight became too heavy to bear, the general did not stand tall. He vanished. What exactly was said in that phone call to make a grown man delete his courage in 60 minutes? And then, the silence came. It did not take days for the diplomatic machinery to grind to a halt. It did not take weeks of negotiation. It took 60 minutes. 1 hour. That is the lifespan of fake sovereignty. Just 1 hour after posting those bold statements, after drawing his line in the sand, General Muhoozi returned to his keyboard. But this time, the fire was gone. The threats of suspending military cooperation, gone. The accusations of kidnapping, vanished. Every single post that had challenged the American embassy was deleted, wiped from the digital record as if they never existed. In their place appeared a new message. A message that I want you to listen to very carefully, because it is the sound of a leader kneeling. The general wrote that he wanted to apologize to his great friends, the United States, for his earlier tweets. He claimed that he had been fed wrong information. He assured the world that he had spoken with the U.S. ambassador and that everything was now okay. Great friends. Let us pause here. How does one go from accusing a foreign power of subversion to calling them great friends in the B of an eye? This is not diplomacy. This is submission. This is the behavior of a man who has been reminded of who actually pays the bills. And consider the excuse: wrong information. This man is not a private citizen reading rumors on WhatsApp. He is the chief of defense forces. He is the son of the president. He has access to the highest level of intelligence the Ugandan state can provide. If the army chief can be fed wrong information about a high-profile kidnapping and a foreign embassy, then the entire security apparatus is incompetent. But we know the truth is simpler and far more painful. The general was not misinformed. He was disciplined. The reality is that a phone call was made, perhaps from the embassy in Kampala, perhaps from the State Department in Washington, D.C. The message would have been short, polite, and absolutely devastating. They would have reminded the general of the consequences. They would have reminded him that you cannot bite the hand that feeds you while your mouth is still full. This reversal is humiliating not because he apologized, but because it exposed the hollowness of his power. When he threatened to suspend military cooperation, he was bluffing, and the Americans knew it. They called his bluff, and he folded immediately. He went from a roaring lion to an obedient servant, promising that military cooperation would continue as usual. What does as usual mean in this context? It means the status quo remains untouched. It means the loud speeches about African independence are for domestic consumption only. It means that when the master speaks, the servant listens. This incident reveals a tragic pattern in our leadership. We have leaders who are sovereign only when it is convenient. They wear the costume of revolutionaries. They adopt the language of Pan-Africanism. They beat their chests and talk about dignity. But the moment their personal power or their foreign funding is threatened, the costume falls off. Imagine for a second, if a leader like Thomas Sankara had made a threat, would he have deleted it an hour later? No, because a true leader speaks only what he means, and he means what he speaks. A true leader understands that sovereignty is not a game of Twitter likes. It is a commitment to face the storm without an umbrella. General Muhoozi thought he could play the part of a strongman, but strength is not measured by how loud you shout. It is measured by how firm you stand when the wind blows. And at the first gust of wind from the west, the general did not just stumble, he fell. He tried to wash away the embarrassment. The political analysts suggested he retracted the tweets to let the situation calm down and resume cordial relations. But you cannot wash away the stain of cowardice. The world saw the leash. The world saw that the general's anger has a limit, and that limit is defined by the United States of America. For the young people of Uganda, and indeed for the youth of Africa, this was a moment of clarity. They saw that the emperor has no clothes. They saw that the man who wants to be their next president is not a man who can defend them from external pressure. He thought he was roaring like a lion, but the world saw he was merely waiting to be fed. Why did he fold so quickly? The answer is not just fear. It is finance. To understand why the general knelt, we must follow the money. And that trail leads us to a trap that has ensnared an entire continent. Why did the general delete the tweet? Was it a sudden change of heart? Was it a newfound respect for diplomatic protocol? No, he deleted it because he remembered where the money comes from. To understand the humiliation of General Muhoozi, we must look past the uniforms and the flags and look at the ledger. The uncomfortable truth is that Uganda, like many nations trapped in the old system, is hooked on an intravenous drip of foreign aid. And the doctor controlling the flow is the United States of America. Let us speak the numbers that the general forgot. The United States is the single largest donor to Uganda. We are talking about nearly $1 billion in assistance every single year. Think about that figure. It is not just numbers on a screen. It is life and death. Through the PEPFAR program alone, the American taxpayer funds the antiretroviral treatment for nearly 1 million Ugandans living with HIV. 1 million lives. If the United States were to take the general's threats seriously, if they were to say, "Fine, you want to suspend cooperation? We will cut the funding," what happens? The clinics close. The medicine stops. The health sector collapses. The general's own people would pay the price for his reckless ego. This is the golden chain. It looks like charity. It looks like benevolence. But it is actually a leash. You cannot bite the hand that is keeping your population alive. And it is not just the hospitals. The general's own playground. The military is funded by the very empire he threatened. The United States provides the training, the equipment, and the logistical support that allows the Ugandan army to operate in Somalia and across the region. The general's tanks run on American goodwill. His soldiers are trained by American instructors. So when he threatened to suspend military cooperation, he was threatening to bankrupt his own command. He was sawing off the branch he was sitting on. This is the tragedy of the paper tiger sovereignty. You can have a flag. You can have an anthem. You can have a general who tweets like a revolutionary. But if your hospitals, your schools, and your barracks are paid for by Washington, you are not free. You are a client state. You are a tenant in your own house, and the landlord can evict you whenever he pleases. This reality stands in stark contrast to the difficult but dignified path chosen by nations like Burkina Faso. In Ouagadougou, the leadership understood a fundamental truth that seems to have escaped the general in Kampala. You cannot claim to be independent while your budget is written in a foreign capital. When Burkina Faso demanded the departure of French troops, they knew there would be a cost. They knew the aid might stop. They knew the friends would turn into critics. But they accepted the risk. They chose the pain of freedom over the comfort of slavery. They understood that true sovereignty is not asking for permission. It is the ability to say no, even when it hurts. General Muhoozi wants the glory of a Traore without the sacrifice. He wants to talk like a liberator, but live like a dependent. He wants to insult the West on Monday and cash their checks on Tuesday. But the world has changed. The youth of Africa can see the difference. They can see who is building a foundation of stone and who is building a castle of sand. They know that a leader who apologizes to a foreign power for defending his country's honor has no honor left to defend. We must ask ourselves a hard question. A question that should keep every African awake at night. Is a nation truly free if its heart stops beating the moment a foreign embassy closes its checkbook? If the answer is no, then we are not citizens, we are hostages. And leaders like Muhoozi are not our commanders. They are merely the prison guards who negotiate with the warden for better rations. The deletion of that tweet was not just a diplomatic correction. It was a confession. It was an admission that despite 40 years of rule by the same family, despite all the oil and the gold and the fertile soil, the pearl of Africa is still held in the palm of another hand. Dependency is a drug, and Uganda's leadership is addicted. But there is a cure. Though it tastes bitter, the West knows this addiction well, and they have a silent way of enforcing it, a weapon far more effective than guns. And how did the United States respond to this declaration of war? Did the State Department issue a furious press release? Did the President of the United States take to social media to argue with the general? No. The empire did not shout. It simply whispered. There is a profound lesson here about the nature of modern power. The United States did not need to engage in a public shouting match because they hold the keys to the engine. They knew that without American technical support, without American intelligence sharing, and without American dollars, the Ugandan military machine would begin to rust within months. They likely made a quiet phone call. Perhaps they gently reminded the general about the maintenance contracts for the Bell helicopters. Perhaps they mentioned the training modules for the pilots. It was the silent whip, a weapon that leaves no bruises on the skin, but breaks the will of the disobedient. This incident exposes the hypocrisy of the Western approach to African leadership. The West is perfectly happy to tolerate a loud dictator or an eccentric general as long as he remains useful. As long as Uganda continues to send its sons to fight in Somalia under the banner of Western-funded peacekeeping, the West will overlook the tweets. They will overlook the democratic deficits. They will accept the apology and move on. They prefer a manageable leader who makes noise but poses no threat to the economic order over a quiet leader who actually changes the system. This is precisely why the reaction to General Muhoozi was a smirk, while the reaction to leaders in the Sahel is panic. The West does not fear the loud tweets of a Muhoozi. They fear the quiet, steely resolve of an Ibrahim Traoré. Why? Because Muhoozi threatens to delete a tweet, but Traoré threatens to delete the entire neocolonial contract. One plays to the gallery. The other changes the architecture of the theater. One asks for more aid. The other demands fair trade. One apologizes when the pressure mounts. The other stands firm, even when the sanctions rain down. The United States and its allies have mastered the art of remote control sovereignty. They allow African nations to have their flags, their anthems, and their presidential palaces. But the moment a leader tries to touch the controls, the currency, the resources, the military alliances, the remote control is activated. The aid is paused. The visas are revoked. The currency is attacked. General Muhoozi felt the vibration of that remote control, and he immediately stepped back into line. He proved to the world that his rebellion was cosmetic. It was a performance. But the audience is no longer amused. We have seen the strings attached to the limbs of the dancer. We have seen that the partnership they speak of is actually a relationship between a rider and a horse. And we know who is holding the reins. The empire does not mind your noise, as long as you do not touch their interests. But the masquerade is over. The audience has grown up, and they are demanding a new script. What does the future hold when the youth stop believing the performance? So, where do we go from here? The story of the general and his deleted tweets is not just a moment of internet drama. It is a mirror held up to the entire continent. It forces us to ask, what kind of harvest do we want for our children? For decades, we have been told that sovereignty is too expensive. We have been told that we are too poor, too weak, and too divided to stand on our own feet. We have been told to accept the aid, to smile for the photos, and to keep quiet when the big powers speak. The path of General Muhoozi is the path of the past. It is the path of managed decline. It is a comfortable road, paved with foreign grants, but it leads to a destination where we own nothing, not even our own voice. It is a world where we trade our dignity for a quiet life. But there is another path. It is steeper. It is rockier. It is the path of sovereign struggle. This path requires us to reject the false comfort of dependency. It requires us to understand that aid is not a gift. It is an anesthetic. It dulls the pain of our underdevelopment, while keeping us on the operating table forever. We must choose trade over aid. We must choose partnership over pity. The critics will say, but we need the money. We need the weapons. We need the medicine. And to them, we say, yes, we have needs, but we also have resources. We have the cobalt that powers their phones. We have the uranium that lights their cities. We have the cocoa that sweetens their lives. Why are we begging for crumbs from the very table that we set? The humiliation of one general in Kampala should be the spark that ignites a new realization. Real power does not come from a Twitter account. It comes from production. It comes from manufacturing. It comes from feeding ourselves. If you cannot feed your own army, you do not have an army. You have a guard force for someone else's interests. If you cannot treat your own sick, you do not have a healthcare system. You have a waiting room for foreign charity. The soil is ready. The seed is in our hands. But we must have the courage to plant it. We need leaders who are willing to endure the short-term pain of sanctions for the long-term gain of freedom. We need a generation that understands that dignity is not something you are given. It is something you build, brick by brick, field by field. The masquerade of the old guard is ending. The curtain is falling on the theater of fake sovereignty. The general may have deleted his tweet, but he cannot delete the truth that has now been seen by millions. The illusion is shattered. The stage is empty. And now, in the silence that follows the applause, a new voice is rising from the Sahel to the savannah. Can you hear it? My brothers and sisters, history is not written by those who delete their words when the heat rises. It is written by those who carve their principles into stone, even when the storm is raging. The story of General Muhoozi is a warning. It is a cautionary tale of what happens when a leader tries to wear the crown of sovereignty without carrying the cross of sacrifice. He wanted the applause of a revolutionary, but he kept the bank account of a dependent. And in the end, he was left with neither. But do not let this story dishearten you. Let it clarify your vision. The dust has settled in Kampala, but the wind of change is blowing from elsewhere. It is blowing from the Sahel. It is blowing from Burkina Faso. While one general in Uganda was busy apologizing to foreign diplomats for a tweet, the people of Burkina Faso were busy reclaiming their land, their minds, and their dignity from foreign powers. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for a phone call to tell them what was allowed. They simply stood up. This is the choice that lies before us. It is the choice between the kneeling general and the standing captain, Ibrahim Traoré. It is the choice between a sovereignty that is performative, a theater of noise and deletion, and a sovereignty that is real, rooted in the soil and watered by the sweat of our own labor. We cannot build a future on the foundation of apology. We cannot build a strong continent if our leaders tremble every time a Western embassy raises an eyebrow. The era of the paper tiger must end. The era of the lion of industry must begin. We must demand leaders who understand that true friendship between nations is based on mutual respect, not on the silence of one and the dominance of the other. We must demand a partnership where our resources are traded, not taken, where our voice is heard, not permitted. So I ask you today, when the history books are written about this generation, which side of the line will you be on? Will you be with those who folded when the pressure came? Or will you be with those who held the line? If you refuse to be a spectator in your own history, if you believe that dignity is worth more than dollars, do not just watch. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video to wake up a sleeping brother or sister. Walk this road with us. The journey is long, but we do not walk alone.